Thank you very much for tuning in. We're now going to depart from our usual format to bring you the terrifying real story of the man who walked into the forest and never returned. This comes from unsolvedmysteries.com. Have you ever heard of someone who simply vanished, gone without a sound, without a struggle, without even a trace of where they went? Imagine stepping into a forest for a short walk and never walking back out. No footprints, no belongings, no goodbye. Just silence, as though the world swallowed you whole. Tonight, I want to take you into one of the strangest and most unsettling cases of disappearance ever to haunt a small American town. This is the chilling real story of the man who walked into the forest and never returned. The story begins in Dry Creek, a quiet little town on the edge of nowhere, with a population just shy of 2,000 people. It was the kind of place where everyone knew each other's names, where gossip spread faster than the wind, and where nothing ever seemed to change. At the edge of Dry Creek stood the forest, an endless sprawl of towering oaks and twisted pines, older than any of the homes, older even than the town itself. It was a place of folklore, warnings, and fear. Children were told never to wander too deep, hunters always went in groups, and there were whispers of strange happenings in its depths, unexplained lights, voices in the night, and sudden vanishings that no one could explain. But in the fall of 1991, a man named Samuel Hargrove ignored those warnings. Samuel was a 42-year-old high school teacher, a quiet man who loved literature, history, and long walks. He was the kind of person who looked at the forest not with fear, but with curiosity. And on one chilly evening in October, Samuel told his neighbor he was going to take a walk to clear his head and gather some inspiration for a new writing project he had been working on. He left just before twilight, a small notebook in hand, and promised he would be back before dark, but Samuel never returned. Part 2, the disappearance the next morning. When Samuel didn't show up for school, people immediately knew something was wrong. He wasn't the kind of man who skipped responsibilities, and he certainly wasn't the type to disappear without a word. His house was checked, but everything was in place. His car sat in the driveway. His keys and wallet were neatly placed on the kitchen table, and there were no signs of a break-in or a struggle. The only thing missing was Samuel himself. By noon, the town had organized a search party. Dozens of volunteers, along with local police and even a few state officers, set out with lanterns, dogs, and equipment. They combed the woods for hours, marking trees with chalk so they wouldn't lose their path. They shouted Samuel's name into the heavy silence of the forest. The search dogs barked, their noses catching scents, but the trails always ended abruptly, as though the man they were following had simply vanished into thin air. For 3 days the search continued, but not a single trace of Samuel was ever found. No torn clothing, no footprints, not even the notebook he carried with him. The forest gave nothing back. It was as if Samuel had walked into the trees and been erased from existence. After a week the search was called off, but the town never forgot. Parents reminded their children of the danger. Neighbors spoke in hushed tones about what might have happened, and the story of the man who walked into the forest and never returned became a chilling reminder of the line between the safety of the town and the darkness of the woods. Part 3. Theories begin. In the months and years that followed, countless theories emerged. Some believed Samuel had simply gotten lost and perished in the woods, though no remains were ever discovered. Others whispered about foul play, that someone had lured him into the forest and ensured he never returned. A few claimed it was something stranger, something supernatural, that the forest itself had taken him. The strangest detail was how abruptly the search trails ended. The dogs tracked him only so far before their noses caught nothing, as though Samuel had stepped off the earth itself. Even the chalk marks made by the search party on nearby trees seemed to fade quicker than expected, as if the forest wanted to erase the evidence of their passage. Part 4. The town's fear. The weeks after Samuel's disappearance changed Dry Creek in ways no one expected. For decades, the forest had been a backdrop to daily life, a thing people respected but rarely feared in their bones. But now, every time the sun dipped below the tree line, people shut their doors earlier. Children were kept on shorter leashes, and hunters who once bragged about their long treks into the wilderness stopped going further than a mile. And it wasn't just the loss of Samuel, it was the manner of his disappearance. People vanish all the time in mountains, deserts, or even busy cities. But in almost every case there's a trail, a clue, a body. Here there was nothing. And the nothingness was what haunted everyone. Some of Samuel's closest friends struggled with guilt. His neighbor, the last known person to see him, replayed their short conversation over and over. "I'll be back before dark," Samuel had said casually, notebook in hand. He hadn't seemed nervous, he hadn't seemed troubled. To him, it was just another walk. But when darkness fell and he didn't return, those words took on a chilling edge. Why didn't the neighbor insist on walking with him? Why didn't anyone stop him from going in? Those questions had no answers, and that silence festered in the town. In the diner, people whispered theories like confessions. Some said Samuel had run away from his life, though no one believed it for long. He had a steady job, close ties, and no reason to vanish willingly. Others swore he'd been taken, not by man, but by the forest itself. "That place don't give back what it takes," muttered old Clyde Merriman. a retired logger who'd spent 40 years cutting timber at the forest's edge. He claimed he'd seen too many strange things in those woods trees that looked different in the morning than they had the night before. Sudden pockets of silence where even birds refused to sing, and shadows that stretched where no light should have been. His stories were usually dismissed, but after Samuel's disappearance, people listened a little closer. Part 5. The police investigation. Officially, the sheriff's office treated it as a missing persons case. They logged Samuel's description, circulated his photo, and coordinated with state search and rescue teams. Helicopters scanned the canopy for clearings where a lost man might wander. Volunteers on ATVs combed logging roads for signs of him, yet every effort ended the same way. Nothing, not a shoe print, not a torn page from his notebook, not a single shred of clothing. The case file grew thicker, but the evidence didn't. The sheriff, James Connolly, admitted years later in an interview that Samuel's case was the most frustrating of his career. "You don't just lose a man like that," he said. "People get lost. Sure, people get hurt, but even in the worst cases, you find something. A scrap of clothing, bones, years later. Something. With Hargrove, there was nothing. It was like he stepped off the map." Privately, Connolly believed there was more to the story than a man getting lost. But without evidence, he couldn't write "vanished into thin air" on a police report, so the file sat unsolved, marked as missing presumed dead. Part 6. Strange accounts. Years passed, and with them the intensity of the search. But then strange accounts began to surface. Hikers passing near Dry Creek claimed to hear voices in the woods, low and indistinct, but urgent, like someone calling for help from far away. A pair of campers swore they saw a man standing between the trees at dawn, motionless, staring, before melting back into the shadows. They described him as tall, with dark hair, holding something in his hand. When shown Samuel's photo later, they both went pale. "That's him," one whispered. Stories like this only added to the mystery. Skeptics dismissed them as imagination, or people being spooked by the legend they'd heard in town. But the reports piled up, each eerily consistent. People heard Samuel's name whispered on the wind. Others claimed to see fleeting figures. Some even said their compasses spun wildly near the spot where Samuel was last believed to have entered. Not all of these stories made it into official reports, of course. The police had no way to verify them, and most locals preferred not to put such things in writing. But if you sat in the diner on a quiet night sipping coffee with the old-timers, you'd hear them tell it all in low voices. The sense that Samuel was still out there, somehow caught between the world of the living and the pull of the forest. Since then, the case has gone cold, yet the legends persist. Every rustle of leaves, every snapped twig echoes with the whisper of Samuel's name, and the forest stands silent, its secrets buried deep in its ancient heart. This has been the terrifying real story of the man who walked into the forest and never returned. Thank you very much for tuning in.